Welcome back to IGN at Gamescom. Now, Moons of Madness is one of the scariest looking video games I've ever seen before, and I can't wait to find out more about it. Here to tell me more are Natasha and Eric from Moons of Madness, and my friend Max, who loves scary stuff.
Let's talk Moons of Madness.
What are you talking about?
You are a coward, but
Yeah.
that means you love scary stuff.
Too much scary stuff can make you go mad.
That's true. Let's get into this. So tell us about Moons of Madness, because I'm incredibly intrigued about this game.
So, Moons of Madness is a cosmic horror game. You play as Shane Newhart, an engineer on a research facility on Mars. I'm not going to spoil the start for you because it's quite an interesting start to the game. But stuff starts to go a bit wrong, and it's your job as an engineer to get things sorted out. And then stuff starts getting a bit weird as well. And also maybe just a tiny bit scary. And things are going to get weirder and scarier and then a bit dangerous as well. So you're going to have to try to figure out what's going on, all the while trying to survive as well.
I will say when previous survivors of a dilapidated space station leave notes in blood, it usually means bad stuff happened. Which is immediately what we're greeted with right here.
Yeah, I'm going to say, as far as space stations go, this one is not looking like it's in great shape here. People have made a lot of comparisons to this between, like they're saying it's like a lot like Dead Space, Event Horizon, Alien Isolation. Do you think those are fair comparisons?
Not Dead Space, actually, because, I mean, if you compare it to Dead Space 1, which was more atmospheric,
Right.
then definitely a little bit. But if you compare it to Dead Space 2, which was more like about, fighting and action, then it's definitely not, because it's definitely not a fighting game. It's not you have other means to try to survive than like weapons and things like that. It's definitely more a survival. You also mentioned Alien Isolation, which is great. At least specific parts of the game, like the ones where you know there's something there, you hear like the sounds in the vents and stuff
Right.
like that, and you try to avoid. So it's definitely more that part than like fighting synthetics and things like that.
So
yeah.
we did see the character pick up a crowbar. Is that going to be used for self-defense or puzzle solving?
That's more for puzzle solving.
Yeah, you will actually get to a part where you're going to need the crowbar pretty soon. Actually, right over there.
Yeah.
I feel like,
So
like Half-Life has conditioned us to be like, yeah, the crowbar, that's a good weapon. And it's like, no, that's for prying things. That's the original use.
Yeah, I think in this particular case with Moons of Madness, it's also that you're not necessarily confronted with things that you think you can fight as well. So I don't think your first instinct would be to use a crowbar to try to fight whatever you might see or like whatever you think you're seeing and things like that.
Yeah.
So in that regard, it's more of a cosmic horror adventure.
Right. I mean, there's clearly
Survival
like there's a
game?
lot of Lovecraftian themes here, which is less about
absolutely.
like a thing that you can fight with a flamethrower, cut its head off or whatever, and it's more like things that will make you go slowly insane because they're so utterly terrifying.
Exactly.
Was this sort of inspired by Lovecraftian themes, or people are comparing it to Mountains of Madness, but in space? Are you drawing from any specific Lovecraft beats, or is it kind of just an overall homage, a Lovecraftian love letter, so to speak?
Well, I think a Lovecraftian love letter is actually a good way of putting it, for sure. You will definitely recognize some themes and some items even from Lovecraft's mythology, and certainly some of the encounters you'll be having, without spoiling too much, will. I mean, you've seen tentacles on the key art already, so there will be tentacles.
There will be
There
tentacles.
will be.
My favorite movie.
It's definitely not based on any specific Lovecraft story.
Right.
It's not like, it's not like College of Space or something like that.
Now, horror movies do a thing where they unfold in front of you, and as the viewer, a consumer, you just watch them and they happen. Video games are explored at your own pace, which makes sort of building up tension in a horrifying environment difficult to sustain and maneuver through. How are you guys sort of developing tension for the player in this game?
Well, I think the sequence that we saw right now is quite a good example of that, because you get sort of kicked right into it, and then you awaken to what seems like just another ordinary day, and that gives you the sense of unease, which you carry along with you, even when you're doing your daily work routine at the research facility. So for me, when playing the game, the scariest parts are quite often the parts where nothing much is really happening, but every now and then you might hear something that reminds you of footsteps. There will be some sound cues that make you think that, oh my god, danger can happen at any moment now.
It's less the part where the doctor gives you the shot, it's more the actual
Exactly.
Expectations,
Right.
yeah. And also the thing that he mentioned with the part at the beginning, and then you get thrown back into normal day. This is what we call zone outs. So they kind of like dream sequences, and you never know, is it a flashback or is it a foreshadowing to something? And as he said, it's kind of putting you in specific situation at unease, kind of, even though it might actually not be a scary situation, but you might remember something that happened earlier on, and then you're just like, this. You have kind of a deja vu. It's like, oh, this happened like half an hour ago, so what is going to happen now, right?
Interesting.
Now, a little while ago, the character picked up a key card that said the Orochi group on it, which is that's a reference to the secret world, isn't that right?
Oh my God! Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. So
Can you speak about sort of you've been sort of cagey about spoilers already,
the
but
tie-in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a little story to this. The game is published by Funcom and co-developed by Funcom, but it's originally developed by Rock Pocket Games in Norway, in Tensberg. And I used to work for Rock Pocket Games before I joined Funcom, we kind of took the game with us, or I kind of took the game with me. And when Funcom came on board, because they do own the Secret World IP franchise, they kind of said, hey, this looks cool, this is already Lovecraft inspired, it was supposed to be from the start. And they were like, hey, what if we rooted it in the Secret World universe?
Ooh.
So when Funcom came on board, the story was adjusted a little bit to fit in that universe. And you don't have to have played the game. You don't need to know the universe. But if you do, it's going to be even more interesting for you, because you will see, like you just said, the Orochi group, and it's like everyone's like, oh, okay, we know these guys.
It's cinematic universe Easter egg type stuff. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That just fleshes out the background and the lore even more to players who know that specific universe.
And also, if you know anything about the Orochi group, you might have some funny thoughts about what's actually going on at this research facility.
Speaking of the research facility, it feels like a wonderfully designed, sort of lived-in space that also is sort of normal, in some ways. How do you build a video game environment that feels sort of boring and sort of normal, but also make it really interesting and it feels like a real place?
I think the idea was always, even when the game was in its conception phase at Rock Pocket, was that we wanted to combine the science with the Lovecraft mythology. So have something that feels very relatable to the player. They can actually, because it's in the near future, it's not super sci-fi with beaming and lasers and things, so that the player feels like, hey, I could be in that specific situation. And that's also the reason it should feel like, okay, I could live there, people live there, and it feels very normal. Because the game starts very normal too.
Right.
You go about your routines and things, and then we slowly creep in things that shouldn't be there and that probably aren't familiar to the player. And we always thought that this combination of also science and more solid and cold things, and then the creepy and Cthulhu of mythos and all that.
And the environment may also change a bit as you move further into the story as well.
You're also playing with lighting and shadows a lot. I mean, this is sort of obviously a very moody game. Outside of the music and the lighting and shadows, what are you guys doing to build the mood for players to explore these environments?
Well, I think the audio is a huge part of it, and especially through some of the sequences. I'm not sure if we're going to get quite that far, but walking around in enclosed spaces and hearing maybe some moody sound cues and small footsteps, things falling over, maybe a splash of water. I think that's a big part of creating the atmosphere that we want for this game.
So this is definitely like lights down, headphones in your apartment or house by yourself.
Oh,
kind
for
of
sure.
game.
Absolutely,
sure.
yeah.
Now, there's clearly a lot of stuff to pick up and look at. You mentioned sort of solving puzzles. Can you talk a bit about how much of this is sort of... I hate this. People call things like a walking simulator, which is
Yeah.
which is fairly reductive, though, you know, some games you can see why they call them that. Can you talk about sort of game mechanics and how much puzzles and, you know, how much players will be doing to sort of get through the game?
Well, from my playthrough, I got stuck several times doing puzzles. So it's I think for this game it wouldn't be fair to call it a walking simulator as such. I mean, it is a very story-driven game for sure. But the puzzles are interesting. Some of them more difficult than others, but with time, everyone should be able to get through them. And there will also be some points in the game where you're forced to defend yourself.
Ooh, interesting. So not necessarily combat, but that does fold into the survival element of like something's coming at you and you have to find a way to keep living.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Terrifying concept. When can people play Moons of Madness?
Oh, it'll be out for Halloween this year.
Oh, good timing. Nice work there. And PC, are you doing consoles down the line? Or?
Xbox One and PlayStation 4 as well.
Awesome. That's so cool. Thank you so much for coming on to our show. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Moons of Madness, one of the many games we're covering right here on IGN at Gamescom now, so don't go anywhere.